Christians are being enticed into a domination paradigm. And
Yes.
I think part of the reason is, and I think there's a couple layers here, when you have those two ideological, strongly grounded poles and they go at it, and then it creates the tension, that tension surfaces something in both of them and in all of us. And that temptation to dominate becomes maximized. That is when domination is the most tempting, I think.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say no to that temptation. That's like the ring in the Lord of the Rings. Like, wow, this
Yeah.
ring is really powerful. Maybe I ought to
Yeah.
put it on. And so I think it almost reveals that domination piece in us that is there in all of us that maybe we don't appreciate enough, nor do we know is there. What would you say to that? Do you agree?
Yeah. Well, I agree. And I think so in my world of studying spirituality and spiritual formation, I think I'm a big fan of tools like the Enneagram and things, or just just being aware of the fact that people are wired differently. And so I think people respond to their stimulus differently based on who they are. And so I think some people, people talk about A, A type, B type, or
Yeah.
the alpha male or whatever. So some people, I think, respond aggressively to things. I think some people respond, passively, or, some people run into a battle, some people retreat from a battle, all that kind of stuff. But I think what actually activates all of this is fear. Because, let's go back to that tribal instinct. If your number one goal is the survival of your tribe, not even your survival of yourself, right? So let's remove the radical individualism that dominates our current moment, right? But just think about, like, most of human history, people's identity was wrapped up in their tribe. And so that's why a warrior would be willing to go out and die in battle, because what matters for them most is that their tribe survives. And so if you become convinced that there is another tribe out there that they desire to eradicate your tribe,
Yeah.
then first of all, you're afraid, because nobody wants to die. Nobody wants to be eradicated. And so that fear, then you're forced with a choice. And so we all do our reptilian regression into the into the spinal, into the brain stem, and be like, fight, flight, freeze, or there's a fourth F that I always forget. But it's a natural response. So you look at a threat and you say, I can take this guy. And so then you fight,
Yeah.
But if you look at the threat and you go, I'm not strong enough to defend myself, then you start going into, well, maybe if I stay frozen, they won't notice me. Or maybe if I run, I might be faster than them.
Yeah.
Or maybe I could, like, fawn. That's what it is, fawn. Like, maybe I could convince them to like me. So I'd rather survive as a slave than be eliminated as an enemy, that kind of thing. And
Interesting.
so, yeah, so you have all of these different natural responses to a threat. And so, like, to your initial question, with Christians who are tempted into domination, when you have rival ideologies, if you feel, for whatever reason, if that ideology threatens your sense of identity or your sense of correctness, or I think for Christians, what's happening is there is a different understanding of the gospel out there that is threatening your construct of who God is and of what the call of the gospel actually is. And suddenly that other version of the gospel becomes a false gospel, which is then a threat to Christianity or to the gospel itself. And so that fear kicks in, and then that sense of self-justified, I'm defending God, and I'm defending all that is good and right, and which has led to all the violence, of the church over the centuries. The Crusades, and all of the horrible things done in the name of Jesus. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yeah, there's I guess I almost want to add one more layer too. So the fear, like you're describing, it creates a dynamic that then creates these postures and positions that I think what happens is then they hurt each other, because people
oh
hurt
yeah,
each other in different ways. And
yep.
I think the fear transitions to contempt and hatred.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is the difference between World War I and World War II. World War I think, is what you're describing, that sort of fear dynamic. And if people had shown more empathy and understanding, like, they maybe have been able to sort of navigate that more wisely. But then they hurt each other really badly. And now there's hatred and contempt, and that contempt is brewing for years, and it manifests in all kinds of ways. And World War II is really a domination based on hatred. And that's sort of the next layer of the cycle of retaliation that goes to like a place that really is almost impossible to undo or to stop. It takes a miracle in a way.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because you have to dehumanize your enemy in order to eradicate them, right? You have to somehow rationalize in your own mind that the person you're against is either outside of the sphere of God's love and concern, or is not actually human, or worthy of existing, and
Yeah.
therefore you feel justified to eliminate them.
Yeah, and that's actually I enjoy watching the show The Walking Dead. Have you ever seen it?
I know of it, but I never watched it.
Okay,
I'm not really a big zombie fan.
Okay. But it's really, the zombies are the backdrop, but it's really what we're talking about, that the show is about. It's these dynamics, and it's really what the people do to each other that's the horror. And what you see is, kind of, because society is unraveled because of this apocalypse, then they end up, these different tribes create, and they end up doing horrible things to each other, and that creates the spiral. And then there are some characters that are trying to resist falling into that and choosing another path. And I think that's, when I think about that hatred spiral, think about all the terrible things that could be done to me and my family and my community and my friends. Like, worst case scenario, it would just be impossible for me to not want revenge and to retaliate against the people that did that. And like, it would take a miracle. And I think that's really where Jesus comes into the scene. That's the story of the Passion, which is, he enters that moment in that exact way and says, there is a miracle, and I am he. And so I think that's maybe the core of what you're trying to introduce us to in The Shadow of Tyranny. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.